So thank you everyone for this session about reducing diesel and carbon emissions for remote Canadian mines. I'm very pleased to see all the participation to this conference, World Conference, which Adrian started, I think, 4 years ago. We've been there every single year, and what we see is a lot more dynamic in integrating renewable power in mining operations. And that's very exciting, and I think it talks great to have you here to promote those projects and analyze those projects for your sites. I've got a great panels here to discuss how to reduce carbon footprint in remote mining. So I'd like my panel to introduce themselves one by one. Nicolas?
I'll skip for my part. I think Adrien did a pretty good job earlier. Thank you.
Okay.
I'm Franck Desrosiers. I'm Assistant Deputy Minister from Natural Resources Canada.
I'm Catherine Farrow. I'm TMAC Resources CEO.
Loïc Didillon, I'm Director Environment and Permitting for Tata Steel Mineral Canada.
Jim Paterson, CEO, Kivlik Energy.
Okay, very good. So we're going to go through some questions to get the discussion going, and about half point we'll go into the audience to respond to questions. Maybe the first questions are for Catherine. How the climate and energy policies impacting the remote power choices at remote mining?
Well, I think the climate change component has really influenced everybody as far as making it a social priority to try to displace diesel, that kind of thing. From our perspective right now, it's not so much the policies, and as we've already heard, we know in our industry that it's the right thing to do. There are a variety of reasons for it. We've talked about greenhouse gas emission during the afternoon, but also in our case, as Floyd and Nicolas already talked about, reduces the amount of diesel we have to bring in and ship on the Arctic Ocean and that kind of thing. So it's the right social message for us to be taking on and to look for alternatives to diesel in the Arctic. So it's not so much driven by policy anymore.
Right, okay. And Frank, do you want to add to this?
Yeah, just maybe a message first. This is fantastic to see such a group of executives and technology developers getting together to share experiences and ideas in terms of how to proceed this. This is clearly, as you've heard the Prime Minister and the Parliamentary Secretary again this morning, a key element of priority for this government. And the very first week of the mandate, they had the opportunity on the world stage to commit Canada to rather bold targets in this area. And I can assure you that in discussions with the cabinet members, this is something that they're very committed to. And I would say not just at the federal level, as I think all of you in the room would have been witness of, but also at the provincial level. We have a higher degree of alignment now than ever in our history in dealing with such matters, and we've been at it for a few decades now. To see now a company executive seeing it in their best interest, both from a commercial operation, but also from a public confidence and relationship with other First Nation communities or local communities, is really heartening to see that happening. And building on the earlier panel we just had, like the availability of the technology and the know-how is very much there. This is not one of those like pipe dreams. This is something that has been in operation, and now our ambition is to scale it up. And if I had to have one message from our perspective, is that we were looking for scale. We're looking for more of those projects around the country. And we will also want to push the technology barrier there to go deeper in terms of level of reliance on other sources of energy and diesel, both for mines, as we're discussing today, but also for First Nation communities or Indigenous community. This is a clear Government of Canada objective, and I suspect you're going to hear more about that on the margins of the next First Ministers meeting in early December, December 8 and 9, where First Ministers will again signal their commitment to pursue that.
Okay, and that brings us to that next question for you. What are the financial help that we can get from the government to develop these projects, because it's still necessary to make these projects accelerate going forward.
Absolutely. So the primary focus, I would say, of governments, as we heard about the experience at the federal government, the Tuglik project from the Raglan mine was a great example of that, where NRCan was one of the backers of such technology, is on the research, development, and demonstration, because we feel at all three levels, one needs support to troubleshoot some of those systems, because as we heard from the operators, they're not interested to bring another headache in their operation. They want to make sure that those technologies are tested and work in harsh conditions, whether it's icing, whether it's difficulty of having access to skilled labor. Those issues are very real. Like, you don't just pick up the phone and get a skilled technician showing up at your site within 20 minutes. It may take weeks to get that person in. Mm-hmm. So it's got to be made in such a way that is simple to operate and robust with the local condition. And this is, for us, is the threshold, much higher threshold, you'll tell me. And lowering the cost is also our key focus. So on those research, demonstration, development and demonstration, that will be our core focus, making sure that the cost component is there, the technology is reliable, and function in real site and real circumstances. There's also opportunities, whether federally or provincially, to help in terms of deployment, i.e. replicating such experiences like the one we just heard before in the case study. And there, many of you would have seen the Prime Minister meet with a large number of deep-pocketed investors last week here in Toronto. So we're having active discussions with pension funds, large institutional investors either from Canada or abroad, or we're looking for yields and steady yields. And the beauty of, let's take wind as an example, but PV would be the same, is that you've got a very predictable revenue stream for long duration. They love that. Bond yield are rather low. So they're looking for ways to generate more revenue. So they're actually quite interested to engage with us and with those developers.
I'll ask the very, very simple question. In Quebec, they invest in innovative projects, and the Raglan project was done with that innovation fund, the Green Fund, and in NRCan, and that made the project going forward. But all the new projects that we're doing, Quebec is investing into implementation of projects, not innovation. They're subsidizing, stop for me. They're providing grant to implement projects, not innovative projects that will work but needs help to bring benefits and economic to the project to go forward. That's to reach carbon gas emission reduction targets. That accelerates projects because the funding is available. And Quebec has committed almost $400 million a year for the next 15 years for that. What's the matching money from the federal on that aspect? Because you do still fund the innovative projects. The problem we have is we've got projects that we know how to build. We're not innovating, we know how to build them. Raglan is an example, Daivic is another one. Same technology, but we still need help to accelerate the building of those projects. So what the government is coming to help on those aspects of financing the project, or
so
not,
maybe,
or giving grants.
Sure. So maybe on the first component, on the innovation side, the government has announced in Budget 2016 over $1 billion set aside for clean technology development, which would include support for such things. I would foresee that announcements would be fairly imminent on this over the coming weeks, where the government will signal clearly its intention to how to deploy those resources. We're, in doing so, very much looking at leveraging opportunities with provinces in particular. And again, this will be the kind of things we'll likely discuss in early December with First Ministers. So I can't scoop ministers,
right,
but
no.
The monies are hardwired in fiscal framework and
Okay.
are committed already, so we don't have to go through the budget process once more. And we're now looking at fine-tuning the proposal and announcing it in a fairly short order. And that will not satisfy all needs, obviously, because there's a lot going on in the energy space.
Right.
But then that coupled with the corporate contribution and the one from financiers, we think that there's scope to do a lot more.
Okay, very good. Well, I think that's much appreciated, and certainly something we're looking forward to hear, really, and we're all here waiting to hear from those opportunities. Nicolas, what opportunities are developing for IPPs for these projects?
Well, the opportunities are there, and especially if the government wants to help. I mean, one of the challenge. Well, first it was the technology. I think we all have demonstrated that the technology can work. The economics, if today in today's oil price environment, you can have a project that's economic, you can almost be certain that it will be economic for the upcoming years, because I don't have a crystal ball, but I doubt the fuel is going to go lower than what we've seen in the past year. So economics, we can make it happen. Technology is there. Financing is still a really big headache, and we went through it for Raglan. Now we're already preparing for the upcoming projects. So where I see a great partnership between public and private projects is that we're result driven. We want to see the project off the ground. We want to really create something and move forward. Yet the bank, they really like to have someone like the government guaranteeing some of the loan or de-risking some part of the projects, and that having a deployment program will really help in terms of partnership, where private companies such as IPP, the mines, and the government can help convince the financing world to finance these projects. And at the end of the day, the risk not even lies on our shoulder. It will be, let's say, for example, for TMAX, it's on their shoulder. It's what's their mineral reserve, what's their operating cost, is the mine going to be able to operate for 20 years? And this is what the financing people look like, but they look at it as a regular utility project where, no, it's a different type of PPA, different type of risk. So I think the opportunity is to closely work with the government to de-risk from a financing point of view, to be able to have acceptable borrowing rate of money.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. So I think it's not just money, it's also the parental guarantee that can make all the difference in getting good. A lot of people want to invest in projects, but not highly risky project. Jim, if I looked at, it's because we're very close. Would it be beneficial for mines to discuss with remote communities on renewable power infrastructure projects?
Absolutely. One of the words that Steve mentioned earlier, the IAM Gold presentation, was legacy. And one of the things that we're dealing with is that we're 200 plus kilometers away from Baker Lake. Mm-hmm. So in fact, if we built a solar farm, the community won't readily be able to take advantage of that once the mine life is over. So it's got to be mobile and modular. And I'm talking legacy. I would think greenhouses, wind turbines, solar farms, those types of things are actually legacy items that the mining community can partner with communities to put into practice. I was very interested to hear what you said in the 26 communities in Nunavut, and that's where the federal government would be a prime partner to create the scale, because we were discussing earlier today that we're an advanced stage exploration company. We're not a mine. And if you look at the thousands of companies in Canada that operate in the exploration sector and the hundreds of exploration camps around the country, almost all of them are off-grid. So together, that's scale. And that scale can be leveraged in communities that are off-grid as well. So the number of mining projects going into production in Canada is very few, but the scale with the exploration community is huge. So if we're looking at logistics and pre-production, and that's where we want to leverage some of these renewable applications.
Okay, no, that's very good. Loic, one question for you. How do you see the economic of renewable power projects? Is it competitive at the moment with diesel?
Yeah, it's very competitive and it's evolved very well, especially with investment of government. At the beginning, CapEx was an issue, and last year we discussed a lot about that, how to finance a project, and now with Tolduc and government, it's not anymore an issue. But it's more than just the price of diesel, it's also the logistic. For us, the site is accessible only by train. So when you have a train, that means that the truck can be off for a few days. I will give you a specific example. Last year, the train was off for 3 weeks, and we have just 3 weeks of fuel on site because the fuel farm now, we cannot build fuel farm for any worst case scenario. So we look at everything, and we think that energy, like renewable energy, could be an option. You know, instead of putting risk your operation, of course it was summer, but in winter, you can just secure by that. So it's more, again, it's more than the price of diesel. It's also everything behind. You need, now also, another point, it's, again, linked to the logistic. You cannot transport fuel as you want. Especially since the last 5 years, fuel transportation is an issue because of new regulation, because of social acceptance. So that also need to be integrated in the cost of the fuel.
And that can be seen as benefits of
It's a
reducing
benefit, yeah.
diesel consumption by
But
having
again,
renewable.
everything changed in the last 5 years, I will say. Financial aspect is more, technology is here. So it's also that we'll discuss later.
And Catherine, you've got the different sites. It's accessible by port and road. Is the economic of renewable power at your mind make sense? How does it stand at this time?
I don't think if it's purely, because what we're talking about here is just financing. If we just do pure financial competitiveness, probably not, and that's why we're having the conversations around financing and everything else. But what motivates us is, as I mentioned before, it's the correct thing to do. We've got a partnership that we've built with Tuglik, and we've got a path forward to make it valuable to our operation. And the value is beyond the initial capex and that kind of thing. We're coming up with financing solutions to make it competitive because we have to. Because right now, our mine generates its own power, and we currently, it's 36 cents a kilowatt hour. Everything we do is about 36 cents a kilowatt hour. And everything we must do is get off that carbon footprint as much as we can and supplant it with another alternative. So it's not so much about pure financial competitiveness. It is the right thing for us to do long term as miners, and in building a multi-generational belt and multi-generational solutions for the people in the north.
Okay, and that's good. And Jim, if you pick on that line, is it those low-hanging fruits from moving away from diesel? So there's trying to reduce costs, but there's other advantages. What could you say about the environmental benefits or economical benefits or other benefits of renewables in remote locations?
Well, again, if we work together with communities in the north and we're able to implement a solution in concert, then I think there's a huge benefit, because it's that word legacy again. You know, a low-paying job that is temporary is not the same as having power forever in your community. I think that makes the mines, but also the communities, more self-sufficient, which is powerful. And I think that's a good goal, that the companies can work together in partnership with the communities. Nobody would argue with the fact that you'd like to be more self-sufficient, anybody, an operation or a community. So I think that's the major one for me when it kind of drives me. Catherine mentioned multi-generational, not only in the mining operation, but the things that the mines will need, the communities will need, and if those communities can be serviced or access power over generations, that's a huge benefit that we can work in concert or in collaboration, and that's very important. And the economics perhaps will come over time, but self-sufficiency is critical.
Okay, and so Catherine mentioned the notion of reduction of storage, and Loic, you mentioned the transportation constraints you have. So I suppose with renewable, you're reducing your constraint in terms of transporting diesel.
We reduce the constraint, and also we secure the project. But I will bring to the next point maybe. But we also have an issue that in one point you will be secure, but also the power change always. So we are not able to, we are insecure with the fact that the power is from the renewable energy is not constant. So it's, you see, so it's why I bring the storage point, because
Right.
now, and we saw that today, the storage technology is here. So and it was not ready 5 years ago or 3 years ago. Now everything changed and everything go quickly. So it's why it's an option to look at it.
So, yeah, so you've got concerns on the operator side that wind power is variable and maybe more difficult to integrate and operate?
Yes, because we have a very specific project with one plant and different satellite points. And in summer, because of the specificity of the site, we have not only one pit, we have almost 20 pit. So the grade need to be changed and need to be fed specifically in the specific concentration for the customer. And we have different customers. So we dispatch the iron product depending on the customer. That means that sometime we need to have the plant running for a few days, and after it will go off. So it's that change always. So, and right now, when we look with you and with other company, we are not very secure with this aspect. So
Okay.
it's why storage seems to be an option.
And Catherine, for your operation at TMAC, do you see ways of moving away from those issues, or can that be addressed in a different context at your mind?
Yeah, we're not distributing at this point to as many nodes as Loic is, and so we can, and we have a mill that is the primary consumer of that power, so that consistently is there. And I think from the perspective of the variety of solutions we're looking at, both for storage and some creative solutions with respect to that, that we'll start to itemize and cost out in the PFS. I think we've got solutions on the horizon, and certainly we fully expect that we will learn how to, and Nicolas showed the example from Raglan, how to work with our operators within our diesel plant to come up with the best and most efficient use of the power that's available to us. And certainly this is how this will just be a communication piece that we build into our regular operating procedures. And when everybody understands that the long-term benefit from achieving those goals, and we have that operating philosophy in place and the communication in place, we see it as a reasonable solution, as coming up with reasonable solutions.
All right, and I mean, I think you can confirm that at Raglan, right? The discussion with the operators and to make sure that
No, it's crucial that they're the one who are controlling the feeder and the power plant. If one say they want, because we allow them to put a set point on the wind turbine, and if they say there's a risk for my operation, they can put the set point at 200 kilowatt, even if it's windy for 3 megawatt. At the end of the day, we're losing revenues and they're burning more fuel, but there's a reason to it. So we need to make sure that and these moments will happen, and it's okay. You are an operating mine, and there's some moments where, let's say, the annual shutdown, where your power demand will go down significantly. If you only have 3, 4, 5 megawatt of power demand, and you have a 6 megawatt of installed capacity, for example, you will have to curtail some wind, and that's part of what we have to build that in our financial model to know that we will lose some revenue because we're dealing with a mining operation. So you want to make sure that the power plant operators are educated and understand and avoid as much as possible these scenarios where they set the limit too low and you curtail some wind. Yeah.
Okay. You mentioned before, I asked you about what are the opportunities for IPPs. And of course, developing those renewable power projects is an opportunity to bring value to the mine. What are the other opportunities you can see, whether it's mine electrification or energy efficiencies? Are there places that you can see contributing to the mine cost?
Yeah, I think the cheapest kilowatt hour is the one that's not consumed. So, of course, energy efficiency is the low-hanging fruit should be picked as early as possible. So, depending on who you talk to, if the operation is really mature, they will have this 80-20 rule applied. They will have applied most of the lower-hanging fruit, and the remaining 20% would be the one that needs high capex or lots of money injection. So, energy efficiency, first of all, that's for sure. And then it's interesting to look at electrification of transport because it wouldn't make sense to electrify a vehicle if the electricity comes from a diesel generator. So if you want to unlock or trigger electrification of transport, you need to have renewable on site. And for us, that's great because that's a bigger load to supply, that's more energy to sell. But then I have this crazy vision of the mine of the future where everything's integrated with vehicle to grid and charging batteries on this electrical vehicle, recharging on the grid, being mobile storage, as you know. And all these things make sense, but you need renewable energy. And I think we really, really need to tackle the heat load and the transport by electrification of transport. But heat load is a large consumer of diesel or natural gas or waste heat, and waste heat is intelligent to use waste heat for heat load. But if you look at communities, they're burning as much diesel for heating purposes as they are for power generation. Everyone in Nunavut has their small diesel tank on their house, on their homes, and they're fueling and burning oil for heating purposes. So we need to look at those as well.
Okay. And frankly, if you look at more we did discuss it, but maybe your point on that, the social and environmental and logistical benefits of these projects to move away from diesel fuel, how's your view on this?
Yeah. Perhaps if I may just add a word on what Nicolas has just shared in terms of the energy efficiency benefit. We see tremendous opportunities there in terms of mining operations, especially around E-class, where we see very short payback. So purely from an operational perspective, we think this is highly attractive. We've been working with a number of large industrial sectors, pulp and paper mills, aluminum companies, but in the mining side, E-class for us seems to be the biggest target and the most attractive one from a commercial operator perspective. So we think that this is an area that is certainly worth focusing and where the impact could be potentially large once we develop solutions that works for our operators. So this is clearly for us an area of focus. To your point around like the broader benefits of being able to make progress on this, there's no question that whether it's for mining projects, and I happen to look at the energy sector too, as you can imagine for large energy projects, the same kind of questions come from local communities, from First Nation communities, who are more and more vocal about not just wanting to make sure that those projects are green and respectful to the environment. It's something that is not just like a slogan for them. It's something that is core to their values and to their very culture. And they're not going to be willing to sacrifice on such central things in their lives and their children's life. Mm-hmm. I think we've got, and this is, I guess, the ambition that this government has laid out, and it is truly genuine in this effort, is to demonstrate that there's shared benefits in developing a local mine, in developing energy projects or forestry operations, and that the communities obviously will never have the unanimity around any kind of project, and we understand that, and as a government we're willing to kind of make sure that projects do evolve once we have clear due process has been followed. But one has to make a significant effort, if we contrast it with the past, mm-hmm. to really reach out to those communities and build up other consortia or clearly demonstrating that there's value for the local communities. And part of the reason why we're targeting mining operators for early adoption of renewables is that you see as company execs as having the technical ability and some of the skills to run some of those operations. Many of those First Nations, as people will appreciate, have very little when it gets to trade and know-how in terms of how to manage power systems. But having a mine nearby who is able to do it for their own benefit, but also to share it with the local community, is in our view very attractive.
Mm-hmm. Oh, great. So before we go to the questions for the audience, and Nicolas has already shared his vision, and I'll ask Catherine, Luc, and Jim, how do you see the energy strategy for the future in the short term, where are we going in terms of energy mix, if it's not renewables, maybe other things?
First, we need to think of, to have an overview. You cannot have only renewable energy. You cannot only have batteries. You cannot have only one thing. You need to play with all of solution, and now we have a lot of options. In the past, it was easy. It was only diesels. Now you have a wind farm, you have batteries, you have, I talked during the lunch that we have nuclear batteries now that you can put underground. So we need to look at with all that and move to electric transportation. But in North, that is already a dream. But it will be great to see one day in the Labrador some electric truck. But I think we are very far from that, but it's always also my dream.
I agree. I think it's a sort of a multi-phased approach, certainly in the next couple of decades, but really still, and I'm probably sounding a little bit like a broken record, but so much of the opportunity is on the storage side, because we do produce a lot of energy that gets wasted, and so whatever we can do, to me, that's ultimately. My dream is having a real viable solution that is available as far as storage, because boy, we'd have to produce so much less, and so just dreaming, but I have no solutions. In the meantime, we have to do all of the above: reduce use and integrate as many of the solutions effectively and not confusingly as possible.
I like the fact that we could talk about big, crazy dreams too, because my dream would be that just on a micro level, and for example, Nunavut territory, all the communities would own their own sources of power. You know, they'd have the infrastructure, they own it, and colossal waste of money to take a petrochemical source from the source of petrochemicals and deliver it all the way to the high Arctic. I mean, there are certain people that would benefit from that, the people that bring it in and maybe store it and get paid to do so, but everybody else has to pay for it. So there's a huge cost to that. And the other thing that we haven't talked about too is just developing the human capital so that the local community members actually not only owning the infrastructure, but learn how to install it and maintain it and operate it. And then those skills are transferable around the world. And particularly in the harsh conditions of the Arctic, that's a specialized skill. And it goes around both poles, but those people would be in high demand globally. Mm-hmm. So that's my vision of an optimal situation for northern projects and northern communities.
Okay, great. So let's turn to the audience. If there are any questions to the panel.
We have a question.
Okay, put the light in.
We talk about, I'm David Willick, I'm from GE. We talk about storage, we talk about multiple different sources of power, renewable power. What I'm not hearing, and maybe you can comment on, is how do we stop crushing 99% waste? And how do we start moving and focusing only on the ore and leaving the waste behind?
Yeah, go ahead.
I agree. Well, what we have to do, and being Doris, as Floyd explained in the presentation, we're looking at high margin ores, we're looking at producing ounces, but try to explain to somebody that, well, we're really not all that worried about tons, and if we leave them underground, and we use the simple example of 36 cents a kilowatt hour, we don't want to bring it up the ramp, we don't want to run it through our mill, et cetera, et cetera. So we are doing things underground to leave waste underground. We're resuing, we're looking at various blasting techniques and that kind of thing. But it's an education that a few of the high-grade miners, when they're marketing, have to be very clear about, and I'll use some of our colleagues, Klondike's and historically Kirkland Lake, have been very clear about the fact that they are trying to get ounces to the mill and not tons. If you're in economies of scale kind of environment. That's not as easy to do when you're shipping 100,000 tons of ore a day to a mill or bigger. But for us, that will very much be a part of our existence, is if we can get the same amount of ounces up the ramp for half the tons, more power to us. That's higher margin ore. And we've had to build some contingencies into our mill and the way we've designed our processing plant to take advantage of that. But we are actively looking at ways of reducing that. And there are a variety of other ways of looking, fracturing in place, and there are a variety of other extractive methods that we'll look at down the road. But right now, it's just very simple. Don't break it and don't bring it up, and be very diligent about it. And that's the first step, because that's the easiest. But it is a marketing, unfortunately, the shareholder base for some parts of some segments of our industry are very, very focused on tons, cost per ton. And unfortunately, we don't get paid in tons, we get paid in ounces. So to your point, we need to be more focused on that.
Yeah, and I think the thing changed also in the last 5 years. Now we have new design. We work a lot on design at the beginning of the project now to reduce the waste. And also we just redesign the pit to have backfill, for example. Instead of bringing every waste on the big stockpile and doing nothing with that, we try to reduce the size of the pit, or to manage the pit in another way, by stage. You know, the first stage is a waste removal, the second one it's for the mining, and the third one is to use the waste to return to the first one, and after we can have green and have some grass and things like that. So we really work also on that. We are not working only on energy, and we are working in everything at the same time, and it's why it takes time.
We're obviously at an exploration stage, so we don't have a feasibility study, but definitely what we were really focused on in the last few years is trying to de-risk the project, and one of the ways to de-risk our project is just to mine less material. And thank goodness industries like the recycling business are actually making huge strides in sorting and segmenting waste, and those things will have applications to what mining operations are doing in the future. And in our case, we used a little used or applied technology called radiometric sorting. There's actually really no operations in the world that are doing it commercially right now, but just the radiometric sorting was able to drop a whole bunch of the amount of rock that we would need to hypothetically move to extract pounds of uranium. So the other sectors are doing a lot of work on our behalf as well, and so we'll benefit those in the future, but at this time we know it's not in the here and now, and we're not producing ore right now, so I can't tell you what we're doing. But we plan to.
Excellent question. Yes?
Hi, it's Peter here from Dewey. I've got a question for you, Catherine, again. With your company considering renewable energy at your mines, are there any clear compromises that you've had to make or you will be making with those developments going ahead, with the different running processes or different operations you're going to make? Is there any compromises that you've actually decided that you're going to make?
Compromises along what line? What was I had trouble hearing the first part of the question.
Sorry, with your mine putting in renewable energy, is there any compromises that you will be making with the decision to put in renewable energy? For example, there is a high risk of the renewable energy affecting your power system. So, is there any decisions on that?
We're really not looking at it that way from the perspective of compromise. We see this as opportunity, and in fact, it's opportunity to reduce some of our risk around diesel consumption and storage and transportation. It's opportunity down the road, as Floyd said, to reduce CapEx to future development. And of course, we're just putting Doris into production right now. And next on the list is Madrid, 8 kilometers down the road. So, really, this is opportunity. This is not about compromise. In fact, this is something to be actually embraced right now.
If I can just add, I think as a baseline, we have to design so they don't have to make compromises. We want to make sure they stay focused on their core business, which is production, bringing ounce to the mill. So on our front, we really need to make it as transparent as possible. Of course, the operator will be impacted, power plant operators. But for the rest, we need to design so they don't have to compromise. Otherwise, if the compromise have to be done, they have to be offsetted by opportunities that are greater. But baseline, we want to make. We have to design so they make no compromise as much as possible.
Last question, I'm afraid.
Yeah, thank you. Merci, Michel. Thanks for the panel.
Jean-François, vas-y.
Yeah, I'm Jean-François from Glencore Raglan Mine, but I'm also the chairman of the board of the Quebec Mining Association. So just a couple comments. James, I think we share the same dream. We are looking for the same thing, but for Nunavik. So I guess it's good to share the same dreams around the room because we all have the same intention: is to have a better mining position with green energy. One comment to Frank. You know that Raglan has been a success. I'm glad to see that TMAC is looking for a similar project, but we really need the support of the government. It's fundamental if we want to make sure the next 5-10 years we're getting there. It's not one project. We were the first one. We took a calculated risk, but we need to see more and more projects, and we really need to see the government being there to support. And also on top of that, if we want to have very strong GHG reduction, emission, standard, objective, we need that. Otherwise, we'll never achieve that. So please, I think on behalf of everyone around the room, we need that for the next 5-10 years. Not one project, not two projects. It has to be part of our business plan as a mining company. And in order to do that, we need support. Once the first domino is going to go, everyone is going to follow. But we need that support. So thanks a lot. Merci, Michel.
Thank you, Jean-François.
Maybe just to say a word on that observation. So support there will be. So there's no question that the government is committed. At the Vancouver Declaration this past June, all First Ministers signed on to a common declaration which targeted, among other things, power for remote and Indigenous communities. It's been present throughout all of our discussions to date, and I've got no indication that there's any kind of pushback whatsoever on this. This is a priority for all of us. Whether when it comes from the Ontario government, the BC government, the Quebec government, and everywhere in between, there's a shared sense of opportunity, as we just heard, that this is something that we had to attack. And just to put things in perspective, because it's important for us as Canadian operators, whether government or in the private sector, to look at our shortcomings, and this is what we've been doing appropriately so for the past hour. But it's also important to also appreciate our element of strengths as a country. Over 80% of our electricity produced in Canada is GHG free. About 60% of it coming, 60-some% coming from hydro, some from wind and solar, obviously, but also nuclear, another 14% or so. So we already have a very clean electricity grid, among the cleanest among the G20 countries. But when we look at how can we kind of move the football further down the field, diesel use clearly for us, it just stands out. And the reason why we're focusing on it is we see just like what you see, is that the costs of operation are outrageously high and the environmental impact are also quite significant. So we're not doing it just to make you guys happy. We're doing this because we were convinced this is the right thing to do, all of us, for the country.
Yeah, we've got 1 billion liter of diesel up north to deal with, and that's what Jean-François's word was saying, is what can we do to accelerate this complete shift? The technology is there. We need help as a team to make that happen.
Thank you, Michel. Please join me in thanking this panel. I think it's been an